Good morning and welcome. We're here to present for the Elmwood Elmwood Forum to the community. We're here today at the Senior Center in Hopkinton. We're also brought to you live by HCAM as well as a taped recording, and also including a Google Teams, Google Meetup link as well. We have a few people online. Those of you that are online, if you could just keep yourselves muted until the end. When we get to the end of the presentation, we will open it up for Q&A. There is a chat function on the Google Meet, and there's also the ability to unmute your mic if you have questions. So with that, we'll jump into it. So I'm Jeff D'Amico, the Owner's Project Manager from Vertex, to help guide the process. I'll introduce my team in a second, but today the agenda that we're going to talk about is our introductions. We'll go over the overall process of where we are to date. We're several months into the feasibility study, which will be completed at the end of 2023. We're focused on site selection. We'll give you a recap on the first submission to the MSBA, which is known as the PDP. We'll also talk about planned options, evaluation criteria, and schedule ahead. And then we'll open it up to any questions. So there's a lot of team members in the process. First and foremost is your elementary school building committee, which is an established and has a good cross-pollination of various committees and groups in towns. I won't read all the names, but they're there in front of you on the screen. Great representation from various town boards, the school department, school committee, and town residents at large. Again, Vertex is your owner's project manager. We're here to help guide the process. I was involved in the marathon school as well, so I was at this forum, I think it was only 8 years ago when we first talked about the marathon school and where that should go. With us this time is our design team, which is Perkins Eastman, the principal Bob Bell, who's the lead designer, and Dan Colley, who's the head project architect, project manager, leading the process, and Vanush, who's our traffic engineer. We'll all be here for Q&A as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about process and timeline. So where we are, the MSBA process breaks into three main components for this feasibility study. Between the start of that and when you would get your new facility online, it takes about a 6-year duration, plus or minus, depending on the ultimate solution, location, and size of building. We've completed the first stage with the building committee, which is known as the preliminary design program. We're currently in the preferred schematic report, which is where we select the actual option, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. And then lastly, the next would be the schematic design, which would take us through about 30% of the overall design of the project. Then we'll have a town meeting vote, which is earmarked for the end of 2023, potentially November, where the residents would vote to support the project, and then we would move forward with the design of the project. Next. So just a more granular view of what those three major submissions mean to the town and to the MSBA. The preliminary design program really looks at the existing conditions of the Elmwood site and the other parcels in town that are being considered. We look at what development rights and restrictions may be on those parcels, including setbacks and zoning requirements. We also look at a preliminary evaluation of alternatives. So at this point, the designers looked at a test fit. So they looked at the size of the building and how it could fit on the individual sites. The educators worked on the educational program, which is how do you vision education delivered for an elementary school in Hopkinton. And so the superintendent led a group of administrators and feedback from the school committee and the project team to develop that ed plan, which has been submitted to the MSBA and under review currently. With that, that spits out the needs of the project that the designers then take and put into the MSBA's template, which is known as the space summary template. And it basically takes those needs and converts it to square footage, and that ultimately sizes the project for you. That was where we've been to date. Currently, we're in the schematic report phase where we look at a final evaluation of alternatives. We're going to show you updated designs today as to where we are now that we've shortlisted the number of sites, ultimately with the goal of coming to a recommended location and size of the building next month in February, including the grade configuration. We'll also look at cost estimates and the sustainability goals within the next couple of months. And then the longer list on your right is schematic design. That'll take you from April through August, where we really do 30% of the overall design. We drill down on the final programs, traffic analysis, environmental, geotech, code analysis, ADA accessibility, and then whether you want to go with a construction manager or a general contractor, and setting the overall total budget. The MSBA will then get back in front of us and tell us what the reimbursement is to the town once we've completed the overall design and handed them the package to review. This is just another kind of snapshot repeat of the last slide, which is just the overall timeline. The green blobs here are the community forums that we've had to date. You see that we've done 3 to date. This is our 4th, and we have another one scheduled in a few weeks, all before we get to the recommended solution that'll go back in front of the school committee, the elementary school building committee, and the select board in the month of February to be submitted to the state in March. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk a little bit about site selection and where we were through the fall.
So at the beginning of the process, we looked at all the available potential properties throughout the entire community, and we identified that could fit the building and fit the program. We knew that that would be an acreage number that we were targeting and a size of property that we were targeting. And we found over the community about 44 or so sites that could potentially support a school of this size. Once we did that, we looked at a first round of how we might cull those sites down, and the biggest factors were the environmental constraints that might be found on the site. So the wetlands and other things that might make the site location or things that might make the site unusable, and that brought us back down to about 12 and ultimately down to these that are here now. So we looked at started with 44, and through that first process we brought it back down to about 12, and then we brought it in, narrowed it even closer into the 5 that we studied even through the PDP process to get to the 2 that we're on now, which are the existing Elm Street site where the school is and the Hayden Row site next to the Marathon School. We also looked at a site on East Main Street, Pleasant Street, and another variation of the Marathon site.
So the preliminary design program, we noted earlier, it's really a recap of what we've done to date, so through the fall until now, which is that ed programming summary, the existing conditions, the site development, and the evaluation of criteria. And then we also listed out the meetings that have occurred in the public, both through the school committee, school building committee, and other forums, and packaged all that up to the state to submit. They've reviewed and responded and provided some comments back, which we'll be reviewing with the building committee at their meeting next Tuesday. And then we're on to the next phase, which is really drilling down on the options. What you see on the screen here is the 5 options that were submitted in that report. And so the state requires us to do 2 things. One, which is a code upgrade, which is what is the residual value of your asset? You have an existing building. What does it take to get that up to code, even if you don't meet the needs of the students in terms of the overall size of the building? And so that part is not on the screen, but I just want to put that out there because that's always there as a baseline, is what does it cost just to upgrade the building alone? What we are required to look at is an addition renovation, and so that's the leftmost image here, where we show in dashed red the outline of the original building, which may be hard to read at this scale, and then where we would add additions kind of bolting on to the end of the building, both at the upper or southern portion of the graph here, and then at the northwest corner. We also look at new construction options. In this case, we carried 2 forward, both the Elmwood site and then the combined Hayden Row, which includes what was previously known as the Tadaro or Irvine parcels, also known as Marathon. So it spans over 2 parcels that are owned by the town, and so we've looked at variations that you'll see in the coming slides. The important thing to note here is that there's 2 grade configurations. The MSBA is allowing us to study both the existing grade, which is a 2-3, which is the current enrollment for Elmwood, and a 2-3-4. Those of you in town understand that there's a large growth in the overall student population that is affecting every school within the district, and so there is an ability for the town to choose an option that has 1 extra grade that helps solve 1 additional layer of complexity that the town needs to solve in the coming years to deal with that population growth. There is no add reno option for a 2-3-4 because you would have a 4 or 5 story building at that point in order to do an addition renovation. So with the larger school, we're looking at all new. With the smaller school, we are looking at an add reno, although it would come with a lot of swing space complexities and cost, and ultimately would probably be the most expensive solution of the options. And that grade configuration is a decision by the school committee, and so I don't want to lose sight of that we're working for the school building committee, and there's a parallel track that's going on this month with the school committee where they're evaluating not only the needs of the Elmwood project, but the overall needs of all schools in town to understand where they would best focus their efforts on addition renovations or new building construction within the town to handle the growing population.
So I'll take us in a little bit closer view at what the plan options are right now. I'll also start by saying this is really feasibility level, meaning they're not fully vetted designs. We're still working on refinements, including the circulation and the exact positioning of the buildings. But this is our first round that shows that what the size and kind of impact and the scope of the program would be on the site. So what we're looking at here is the Elm Street site. It's the existing Elmwood School, is shown in the red dotted outline with the kind of colored hatched area. This is an ad reno, so we're showing an overlay of that existing building, but then what is white here are new additions. And in some cases, the new addition is built over existing, so we'd have some demolition of portions of the existing building, and then the new construction added. In this case, we're trying to reuse as much of the building as we can. I think we reuse about 2/3 of the building. We're rebuilding brand new classrooms, which are the two kind of white angled wings. In this option, we are taking the existing gymnasium and repurposing it as a cafeteria. It's a little too small to be the future gymnasium because of the number of students that will be enrolled in the school and the amount of times that they take physical education. They just can't do it in a single gym space. So we'd be building a brand new gymnasium, repurposing the old one for a cafeteria. You can see on the site a couple of things. First, to build new construction with the existing school, it'll be quite disruptive. We always would do our best to make sure that we separate where the students are versus where the contractor is, but it's very close proximity. The school would be in operation and the contractor would have their zone to build new construction. To do a project in that way where the students are in teaching and learning is still happening in the school, but we're trying to build new construction and renovate pieces, it tends to stretch the schedule, takes a little bit longer. And as you know, this is just a 2-grade school, so that would be certainly the experience of a whole cohort of students that are at that school. Their entire experience would be through construction. So some challenges with this. What we see here also on the existing site, the dotted line represents the property. It fades off to the side here. We have the fields shown in green. They're where the current fields are right now. You can see the gas line that runs through, the high pressure gas line that runs through the site, which really creates an additional challenge because we can only put a building on one side or the other. We can't put it over the gas line, so it becomes a little bit of a cramped site. The parking is expanded, and that's currently where there's a knoll of trees right now and woodlands, so we'd have to clear that. In all cases, we try to keep as much traffic off the streets as possible. We'd be continuing to use Elm Street as the primary entrance and exit, but it's always wise to have a second means, even if it's for emergency or for additional relief, so there would be a connection to Wood Street. I believe there's already kind of a small connection there right now, but it's not maybe paved as an actual roadway connection. And I think that's pretty much it. Also, this doesn't show probably the progress of separating cars and buses, but for safety, it's really important that we separate the cars and buses, get them off the street, but create safe pathways for students to walk and enter into the building. The next option also on Elm Street would be a brand new school. We've already refined this one so it's not quite as spread out, but here you can see again the dotted line for the existing Elmwood. And the intent here is to build an entire school without touching the existing building. So the existing building can function, but again, with new construction, even though it's separate in such close proximity to the existing building, it will be disruptive. It'll certainly interrupt the circulation on site and the students' access to parking. For the contractor to build a new building, if it took this shape or any shape, they would need their own parking, they would need lay-down space for materials, so it is quite a compromise for the functioning inside and out of the existing school. What we can see here is The majority of the parking is located where the fields are now. The new building, as I had mentioned, really comes very close to the existing in this diagram. We've since refined this to pull the wings back. But after the new building is built, the existing building would be demolished, and then we can see there's zones for recess and for physical education, play areas that would then be in the back of the site where the existing building is now. Same circulation, so we would primarily come in off of Elm Street, but have that secondary access to Wood Street, pull as many cars off as we can. The perimeter road around the site does a number of things. It allows us to pull more cars off the street, but it also becomes an emergency access around the building for fire safety. And I think we'll continue to refine this. You can see the gas line again runs through the middle of the site. We'll probably have to adjust the parking to make sure that we don't have any stationary vehicles over that gas line and just roadways. So still being refined. A final option on Elm Street was to look at the possibility, if it's so disruptive, would it be possible to just build the ideal school, demolish the existing school, just build a brand new school, but it would mean the students would need someplace else to go. There isn't currently swing space that can accommodate. There are options or the potential to do modular classrooms and stage them somewhere to create the needs for the school, but really that would come at just high price tag, because it's not only extra money that wouldn't be bricks and mortar put into the building, but the state doesn't reimburse on that. Regardless, we just wanted to turn over every stone and look at every option. So this shows a building that fits probably a little bit more comfortable on the site because it's built over the existing building, but in the end, probably not viable. If I move over to the Hayden Row site, just north of the screen here would be the Marathon School. So we're building between the Marathon School and the extended parcels here. We're showing one location for a potential new facility. In this case, we're building, the site continues further to the east. We're trying to keep the building to a little bit closer to Hayden Row, so that we're not extending utilities or doing too much building and construction deep into the site. But you can see the outline of the sites creates a little bit of a pinch point. So even though there's a tremendous amount of land here, it is a little pinched in that location. This locates the building just after that pinch and keeps all the parking and the majority of the circulation out in front of the school. There would be the ability to build fields behind the school and also between the Marathon and the new facility. Not that all those fields would need to be built. It's just showing the potential. So here we've got separation of buses and cars, very similar. In this diagram, it shows an entrance and exit off of Hayden Row, but what we've learned through our traffic studies is that the best solution would really be to treat this like a campus, so to connect the inlet with the current Marathon inlet and have a campus road inside this site that connects both Marathon and this new Elmwood facility. That would allow us to get pretty much all the cars, all the buses off the street, not backed up onto Hayden Row. That, with some additional traffic measures, we believe would take care of the increase of having another school in the location. We also know that there are some advantages to this consolidation. The busing lines that right now are separate for Elmwood and for the Marathon School can be combined and consolidated, so that's less buses on the street and less buses going crisscross through the town. So there are some advantages that we're continuing to study. So this is one location. An additional location would be just up from that pinch point that I showed you earlier. So similar shape to the building. Again, it would want to have the same campus connection from Marathon School into the site. Here you can see the fields and the physical education, the recess areas are really close to the building, so this is a little bit more of a compact location, but plenty of room to spread out. I think the fields down in the lower right are really optional, not necessary as part of the project. But otherwise you can see what that would take shape. And then we looked at, back to the original location, we looked at maybe different shapes and ways to organize the building. Here the site is large enough so the building really isn't forced into some funny geometry, so this is just a different version of the plan. It has 3 wings. Again, for each one of these, what we're actually showing is the larger school, so it would be the grade 2, 3, 4. It would be 3 stories. If it were only the grade 2, 4, it would be 2 stories. And that's kind of our first round of study on these. They could, if it's a grade 2, 4, it could also be 3 stories and be an even smaller footprint, something that we can refine and develop.
One of the notes there in the end of each wing, you'll see a little dashed black line, and that's room for expansion. The MSBA requires all towns to go and identify an area for expansion. Certainly this town has had the need to do that with Marathon, and so we would repeat the same process here to make sure there's a space set aside free of utilities or other encumbrances that will allow for an addition in the future should it be needed.
Right. And the last option is similar. Again, a different floor plan located now just basically northwest of that pitch point, so it's a little bit more consolidated. We can see the consolidated parking, consolidated fields, recess, and PE zones. I don't think there's much else to say on the site. So as we take the next step, I guess the evaluation criteria for these options, we have the number of options that you've seen here. It's actually twice as many options because for each one it's a grade 2, 3 or a 2, 3, 4. And I'll let Jeff walk through the evaluation criteria.
That's great. So what you've seen is a summary to where we are to date, and I'm going to talk a little about where we go from here. And so the building committee this fall established some important criteria. So it's important to understand, what drives the ultimate solution. And so the 17 or so items listed on the screen are the data that we've collected from the building committee and the community at prior forums. So first and foremost, does it meet the educational needs that the school department has developed? Cost, and at this point we're comparing relative costs of the options. We're under extreme escalation issues over the past couple of years, which all of us are used to with the costs we're seeing every day at the grocery store and beyond. So we're doing the relative cost comparison of the options. We'll also look at schedule duration. As Bob talked about with some of the ad renos or the options at Elmwood, you'll end up with a longer duration just because of the demolition and working around the existing building. We'll also look at disruptions to the education if in construction or loss of fields. Sustainability is an important topic, making sure we're building green. We've had a few forums on that with the various groups in town, both at their venues as well as the community forums. Net zero achievable. So net zero is when you offset the utility usage of your building by power generation, such as photovoltaics on the roof. The town may choose to have geothermal wells similar to what you did in the library to help generate and use the assets that you have in Mother Nature to help sustain the building. We'll also look at impacts to neighbors at all the sites. We'll look at swing space, which is most important at the Elmwood site. We'll always talk about traffic because that's an important conversation in town. Parking and on-site circulation, Bob has just walked you through how we're going to solve that and the interconnections of the on-site circulation to make sure we're not backing up onto the public roadways. Permitting and approval complexities, we've talked about setbacks and things like that we need to focus on. School growth, very important in the town of Hopkinton. You guys are under a tremendous growth. We want to make sure that we're solving that growth but also providing future capacity as well. District operations and busing, Bob has hit on that, with the change in location, there may be benefits to the busing as well as ups and downs in the operational costs of those changes. Public safety, so we're going to reach out to the police and fire to show them the options and collect their feedback. We'll also talk about complexities. Wetlands and ledge happen throughout the town of Hopkinton, and so we want to look at the individual sites because they are relevant to both these sites that we're looking at. Walkability and bikeability are the near-term walkers and students, and then lastly, proximity to public utilities. So these are the criteria that we've established with the group. So what we work with the group is, the building committee, is to establish this in a way that becomes a working tool. And so this grid here is meant to be a ledger sheet that the building committee can use to kind of take their notes down and help themselves talk about and debate the options. So across the top, you'll see the options listed, and so you can't read the font here, but the leftmost one is that code upgrade that the state requires, and then the ad reno, those are both in light blue. New options at Elmwood are in the darker blue, and then the peach represents the new options at the combined Hayden Row sites that Bob just walked you through. We approached this with a traffic light, which is what the legend at the very top shows, which is the least favorable would be a red light and the most favorable would be a dark green. And then we graded out between an orange, a yellow, and a light green in between, really to show graphically the better options rising to the top. And on the leftmost column, we've listed out all the criteria that I just read to you on the prior slide. And what that looks like on a sample is this stoplight presentation that we're going to publish for the public, and it'll be on the town website so that you can understand how the building committee came to their conclusions, and the most advantageous options will rise to the top with the greens, both dark and light. Just because a green has an orange or red, it may not be the end of that option. We're looking for the most greens and red, dark greens and light greens to come to the best conclusion for the recommendation that's the most fiscally responsible and educationally appropriate solution for the town of Hopkinton. Apologize for my tongue twister there. So schedule ahead. Where we are today is collecting feedback, and that is going to continue through the month of January and into February. We've set up many forums, both here today. As I noted, the school committee is talking about grade configuration at all their meetings over the month of January and into February. We also have another community forum scheduled on the 24th. The building committee meeting is meeting every other week, the school building committee. So there's no shortage of abilities for you to tune in at home. These are all taped and live. So not only you can witness it and participate, you can also see the conversation happening after the fact, and those will carry on through the end of the month. The decision making occurs in the month of February. First, with the school committee, they're targeted to have their recommendation on the grade configuration, whether to go 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 by February 2nd. And then the building committee will then take that information and finalize their recommendation on the preferred schematic, which will lock in the location of the building, the overall size of the building, and taking the grade configuration decision by the school committee to make a recommended solution that they want to bring back to the town, to the MSBA. We'll then bring that back in front of the school committee in the middle of February and to the select board by the end of February for their support votes, and then package it all up in a submission to the MSBA by March 1st for submission to, this should say the PSR, not PDP, but the preferred schematic report by the 2nd of March. I know we didn't hit on cost, and this is the end of our presentation slide, but I do want to hit on the overall cost. One thing we've looked at is the relative cost as part of the PDP, that first submission. We're going to have a more dialed-in cost with the updated schematics that you've seen in terms of the test fit option, and we'll present that in front of the building committee. We won't have a finalized version of the reimbursement rate until we get to the final solution in August and submit that to the state. But we do know, looking at the overall value, that there is savings to the town of going to the 2-4 option. What was presented to the school committee at the January 5th presentation was the overall district solution. Because of the enrollment wave that's coming through this school, it's hitting all schools. And so each of the schools in town needs some sort of an addition or renovation to handle the volume of students that are both currently here and expected in the pipeline. And so, that does create a large number of dollars that need to be addressed. But by going through the 2-4 solution, it solves 3 grades instead of 2. It also leverages the reimbursement from the MSBA and could net out a $15 million overall savings back to the town by solving that extra grade within the MSBA process. So with that, that concludes our overall presentation. Last point I want to make is up on the screen is our project website, elmwoodproject.com. I know I threw a lot of information to you in the public today and those of you viewing at home. This stuff is up on the website. All of the building committee presentations, the forum presentations are up there on the website, as well as the meeting minutes. We also have links to the HCAM presentations from the school committee where they're discussing grade configuration and other aspects that relate to the project. So there's a lot of information out there so you can digest it as time permits. And so that's elmwoodproject.com. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. And for those of you following along at home, you can both unmute and ask a question, or on the bottom right of the Google Meets, there's what's known as an activity menu, which is the little triangle on top of a square and a circle. And so that'll allow you to open the chat and ask any questions you may have and that we can take and answer. And I'm just going to click on that before I open it up to the audience here. So far, I'll let the people in the audience virtually figure out those steps. Are there any questions from the public present?
Yeah, I was just curious how solid that estimate was for a square foot cost, which I think was reported in the Independent and maybe came up with some other discussions. But it looks like almost a doubling of what it costs to build marathons. Is there any, I mean, how cast and concrete is that estimate? Is that really going to be the cost? Is it going to go higher? Could it go lower?
Excellent question and excellent observations. We are under dramatic escalation increases, and so they're priced in today's dollars with escalation beyond what we think it will happen by the time we open the building. And so with an MSBA project, we have to project out the bids at this point, right, where we are in the process at the concept level. And the number that'll go in front of the town is only that 30% of design, and that'll include both your construction funding and your design funding, where other town projects, sometimes you bring it all the way through design and come back with a firm bid number for the in hand. We're going to project out. None of us have a crystal ball, and certainly over the last 2 years, nobody could have foreseen the magnitude of escalation. To break that down for the public, pre-pandemic, we were averaging 3 to 4 to sometimes 5% in terms of escalation. When the pandemic hit, the world locked down, we throttled back to 1%, and now it has sprung forward at consecutively 2 years of 12%. And so that's a dramatic growth. And so, you know, Marathon being bid 6 years ago, I think it was under very different circumstances of today's dollars. And so we're using that compounded 12% plus projecting out a few years. We're assuming that next year, being current 2023, is about a 7% escalation, you know, working our way back down, but not all the way there, and then getting back to a more normalized 4% over the next couple of years before we go out to bid. And that's how we're projecting it. A few of the other changes that have happened since Marathon to now, codes have upgraded. We now have more insulation, stretch code, which is trying to make the building more energy efficient. And so we have thicker insulation on the walls and the roof, so that means the overall building costs themselves are more expensive than they were under the construction of the Marathon. Sustainability is an ongoing conversation with the building committee. There are decisions that can be made that can reduce that cost or increase that cost based on what the feedback of the town and the committees are. Examples of that are, you know, geothermal. So an important conversation that the building committee is going under. It's a higher upfront capital cost, so you spend more money day one to build geothermal wells, but you'll spend less money in the operational costs, which will impact the long-term operations of the building. So you save long-term, but you do pay more upfront. So that is an example of how we could save money today but cost money tomorrow, and that's a conversation that the building committee and others in town need to wrestle with to have a good recommendation. We are seeing favorable bid results over the last 2 months, which is great news. You know, we're hoping that by the time we get to August, that 7% is actualized or lower, and we can really have a better prediction and a better number that we want to bring down to the town. So to answer your question, yes, it could go up or it could go down based on where we go from now until August. And in August, we will lock in the overall dollars, and those other conversations about sustainability will influence that. Dollars per square foot, you know, matter a little with which solution you pick, right? There's a lot of fixed costs, you know, whether you build the third grade or not. You know, your size of gym and cafeteria and administration are more fixed, right? You're adding additional students, but it's not a one-for-one add for those spaces. You are incrementally increasing those, but your dollars per square foot will be less, although your overall cost will be higher, but you're solving more of those solutions, which is why I said in comparison to the overall solution that this town needs to come up with for the all grades, you could be netting a $15 million savings if you go with the larger because of the reimbursement and because of solving those other items with this project versus more multiple smaller projects. I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully that
was helpful. Thank you.
I'd probably add that to part of your question, the costs are primarily relative, so they are not actuals.
Right.
Right.
And the ad reno, I always put this out there, has the most propensity to be go up or down, right? Because we've done an analysis to understand the code triggers of the building, but on an ad reno, you never know what's hidden behind the wall. So those projects have a little more risk as it relates to costs versus the new builds. We are going to focus on more field investigation, but over the next couple of months in the spring. So with whichever option is selected, we'll do geotechnical borings, more soil analysis. We'll also flag the wetlands, really to fine-tune where the buildings line up. So by the time we get to August, we'll have a lot more data knowing where the building is. As you saw with the options, both at Elmwood and at Hayden Row, we've swung the building in multiple locations. When the building committee locks in their recommended solution in February, we'll then, blanket that area to make sure we can collect as much information as possible to really fine-tune that number, because we know whatever number comes before the town is a big ask, and it's dramatically different than Marathon. Another point I want to make about Marathon is that the population has doubled from the time that was built, and you've strategically added classroom additions to that building, but not dealt with the overall administration, cafeteria, gym, and other components of that. So we've already done 2 additions to that building. First, the original cost of that building was the $47 million. We added 1 addition to that, and now you're adding a second addition, but there's still more need in that building, so it's not a direct comparable for apples to apples. But all great questions. So I'm not currently seeing any questions in the chat. Are there anybody online that would like to unmute and ask a question? Okay, hearing none on the chat. Any other questions in the audience? Sure.
Yeah, just one other thing. So the sustainability, the net zero, those goals.
Yep.
What do those particular goals, objectives add to the cost? We know that.
It's an excellent question and an ongoing debate. Part of the reason for that, and my smirk is, my teammates and I, we always have a different vision of that, even amongst ourselves, because if it's an all-in solution, the answer is less than if you put a toe in the water or a foot in the water or a leg in the water. So, we have to increase the overall energy efficiency of the building as a baseline, right? The stretch energy code is that first step. To add more insulation, that helps with your overall operational cost. So that's one cost savings. We can reduce the amount of glass in a building to make it more energy efficient. And that also can save some dollars as well. But then if you right size all your mechanical equipment, you offset some of those other costs. So it's kind of if you go all in with the solution, the cost ends up being less than if you just pick and choose the components that you want to do to the building. So all in, it will save you more money from a holistic standpoint. Picking and choosing will save you operational costs, but you might not realize all the savings because you've taken selective items versus the full solution. I don't know if you guys want to color that any different.
Yeah, I think we're right now in the process of looking at different mechanical systems, but also a companion effort to understand things that Jeff's talking about. If we factor in more insulation, maybe less exterior glass holistically or in an integrated way, what is going to be the real cost? Because if we just pick a mechanical system on its own, that's a certain cost. But if we really look at how insulation or something like that may change the size of the system, then it's really a better look at the true costs. And we are, we've been seasoned and done enough schools where we also are taking a practical approach. The MSBA requires that this school is a green school, a sustainable school. It needs to meet a certain threshold with LEED or CHIPS. Those are 2 standards in the industry for sustainability. So what we're talking about is kind of going the extra distance. The last thing I'll say is that we also look at the educational benefits. So things like daylight can improve test scores. So we want to make sure that when we think about sustainability, we're also thinking about the performance of the school energy-wise, but also from an educational point of view.
Good question. Any other questions online? Okay, still not seeing anything else from the audience. Okay. All right, well, that concludes our presentation for today, this morning. As I noted, we do have upcoming forums as well in the evening. We're trying to make sure we reach out to as many constituents as possible to have available times. The website also has an email address, so you can reach out via that email address to submit questions that you think of after the fact, or that occur to you as you read and follow along with the various meetings that happen in town. So feel free to send in questions to that email address. It gets distributed to multiple of us amongst the project team. That next forum is January 24th again in the evening. The school committee meeting is ongoing Thursdays, and the building committee meeting is every other Tuesday. So many conversations to occur over the month of January, leading to the decisions in February, leading ultimately to the recommendation the end of August and coming back to the voters in November. So I want to thank you for your time, and we appreciate it. So stay tuned and tune in. Thank you.